Good morning. Welcome to the Sativa segment. This is your host, Richard Chang. We're recording episode 36 today. Looking forward to this episode. As I was telling somebody in my personal life, it's because one of the guests here just he'll make my life really easy because, quite frankly, he's quite the talker. But before we get started, I just want to say this episode is fueled by Ritter Spencer Chang. It's a local law firm here in Dallas, Texas, with 2 other offices in 2 other states. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, feel free to go to ritterspencerchang.com. Doug, you're going to make my life really easy today, right? We're going to talk about ESOPs, which is not...
Don't dismiss Brad, by the way. Brad,
no, I'm getting to Brad because, hold on. ESOPs is not the most exciting topic typically, right? But we're going to make it exciting.
I would disagree with that, but that's okay.
But we're gonna throw a twist in there. We're gonna throw in a cannabis twist, and that's where Brad Bennett comes in. Brad, thank you for coming on the show all the way from Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio. Go Bucks.
Oh my gosh.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you for making the trip. And of course, I know somebody who lives in Columbus, and you guys are very passionate about your Buckeyes, the Ohio State,
and coming off of a big win against Michigan, most importantly. So
yeah, that's a big game.
Huge game.
They tried to trademark the word "the." That was interesting.
What is that song that you guys have? Sloopy or Snoopy or something?
Hang on, Sloopy.
Sloopy, yes, it is. I mean,
I'm not going to sing it for you, but I don't want to bore the audience. But it's
hey, you know, I promised somebody that Sloopy was gonna be sung on the show. Oh man! So Doug, you and I have known each other for a while.
Yes, sir.
When we connected, I want to say maybe about 6 years ago. I was at another law firm, and you were at CBiz doing valuations. Correct.
Correct. I was in their valuation. So CBiz is obviously a top 10, depending upon the day and the mergers that go on. CPA firm, but they have one of the largest valuation practices in the country, and so I worked in that division of the head of that group is here in Dallas. So that's how we met, was from the valuation side of things.
Yeah. So I mean, would you say that, given your valuation background and comparing what you do now with Lazear, there's some overlap in the skill sets?
So yeah, and just to be clear, I was business development for the valuation practice, but I do have a finance background, and so they even asked me at one point, "Do you want to do valuation?" Because you picked it up very rapidly. But 100%, it's because anytime you're looking or talking to an owner about, you know, their path forward and what matches their goals, I mean, you can't overlook the fact that the value of their company is a major component of that decision process. Now, the people who track the ESOPs, and we'll talk about this later, they have other goals outside of that. The folks that come to us have a certain personality where, yeah, you know, I want fair value for my company, but I also care about my legacy, my people. I actually like what I do. ESOPs do not attract owners who want money now and go buy an island in the Caribbean. They actually attract to owners who kind of want to keep a foot in the business. Maybe they just want to be on the board, chairman of the board. Maybe they want to transition to the next generation of employees, but they fit a certain, I've met with a ton of advisors, and I always say, it's not about the company. It's not about the financials. It's about what the owner is trying to accomplish that we're trying to understand. You know, any business that's healthy and growing can be an ESOP, but the segment of folks that attract to this are folks that are still in that 5 to 7 year window, like what they do. So we'll talk about this more in the cannabis, but it's a bit of a passion industry, right?
Yeah.
I tend to work a lot of construction here in Texas, but who doesn't love playing with trucks, right? Like Dad built a $100 million general contracting business, and the kids don't want to get their hands dirty. So they want to keep hanging out with their guys and their people and go into the bass fishing and the clay shoots, et cetera. And it's no different within this industry, is that it tends to attract those types of folks. So yeah, I'll talk too much, so stop.
Well, you know, like I said, your job is to make my job easy today. Now, tell me, Brad, you're from Columbus, Ohio. Did you grow up there?
Yeah, born and raised Northeast Ohio. Then have basically been in Ohio my entire life. Went to school at a small school called Wittenberg, and graduated. Got a master's at Ohio State.
Ohio State.
The Ohio State. Well, if you live in Ohio, it's a rite of passage to be a Buckeye fan. You gotta stick with it, and if you're not, you're kind of ostracized. So, anyways, so moved to KPMG from there. Spent about 7 years in the audit practice. Was a manager, about to be promoted to senior manager when I decided this isn't for me. Wasn't very excited, and it turned into me getting into the M&A world, and so I ended up making it into private equity for about 2.5 years, and I was trying to make it back, and I was up in Cleveland at that point, and was looking for a job back down in Columbus, kind of wanted to get back down there, and ran into this company called Lazear Capital. I had some familiarity with ESOPs in general. Private equity will sometimes lend what we call subordinated debt into the ESOP structure to provide more cash at close.
Oh, I didn't know that. Huh. Okay.
And so that I had some familiarity. Lazear was growing quite a bit when I saw it, and I was like, this seems like an awesome opportunity, and it's something that we could really believe in. And so it's kind of where I'm at today. I've been at Lazear for about a year and 4 months at this point.
Now, is your practice national, or is it focused generally in the Midwest?
We're national. So if you look at Lazear across the country, we're based in Columbus. The core of our company is based in Columbus. Probably about 40 of the 55 employees we have are there. And then kind of the rest are in 14, 15 offices across the country, spanning, from New York down the East Coast to North Carolina to Florida, and then all the way out west with Doug in Texas. We go out to Arizona, California. Just hired someone in Denver. So, ESOPs travel, and so do we. And so we can kind of travel wherever's needed.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a federal plan, right?
Correct.
So, Doug, I was going to ask you. I mean, what is an ESOP?
Okay.
Let's start off there. Right? I mean, what's an ESOP? Most people don't even know what an ESOP is.
Yeah. So I mean, at its core, an ESOP, and I'm stealing the thunder, the verbiage from Bruce Lazear, our founding partner, but it is a congressionally created tax incentive structure to encourage owners to consider this as one of their options. You have basically 4 options. You can pass it on to the family, you can sell it to a third party, you've got an MBO, or you've got an ESOP.
And just to be clear, an ESOP stands for Employee Stock Option Plan, correct?
Ownership plan.
Ownership plan.
Correct. So at its core, it's just one of the options, but it was kind of, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, it was looked at by a lot of people as sort of just a benefit plan, like a 401k, and maybe back in the 80s and 90s. But over the past 10, 15 years, people have really understood that it is truly a succession plan that involves maximizing the value, the fair market value, which is what an ESOP gets to pay for the business, maximizing the tax outcomes. One of the things that I like, Bruce, you're an attorney. A lot of people look at taxes as penalties. And Bruce likes to say, and he's a tax attorney by training, he was 20-year tax M&A attorney. And he said, actually, I like to look at taxes as incentives. Congress creates tax laws to incent you to do things that they think are beneficial for us as a group. So buying a home, putting kids through college, taking care of the elderly. So they create these credits and incentives. So in that same vein of thought, they created ESOPs in 1974 to encourage owners to at least try to understand, maybe rule it out. Maybe you're just doing the due diligence, but any healthy business is eligible to become an ESOP. It's just whether it matches the goals of the owner. And so that's why they gave it these significant tax incentives to differentiate it from a traditional third-party sale.
Got it. Now, Brad, you and I were talking about the fact that Lazear goes into a company that's usually around, I would say, mid-stage to late stage. They've established themselves. It's probably not appropriate for a startup or an early stage business. But when you go in, you were telling me how you convert them to an S corp, and once it's converted, there's this entire plan. Involves trustees. Tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so maybe taking a little bit of a step back. I think for us, once we kind of meet with an owner and we figure out the goals and it's an option for them and they're interested, we're going to really start jumping into the details. And so we go through something called a feasibility analysis, which is commonplace in the ESOP industry and maybe a unique term to others outside of it. But basically, we're going to assess whether we think doing an ESOP is an option for a company. And what we're really going to do is we're going to get historical financials. We're going to get a 5-year projection from the company. We're going to dig into their tax returns. We're going to understand the entity structure, whether they're a C Corp, an S Corp today. And then we're going to go through and get on a deep dive call, understand the business inside and out. And then what we do from that is basically, soup to nuts, create a transaction for them of what we think we can get them from a value perspective, what the tax benefits may look like, what we would have to do, some of the kind of caveats of like, hey, by the way, we're going to have to be thinking about X, Y, and Z during the transaction. We're going to have to work through that. Some of that is this restructuring and stuff like that. And so, from an S Corp perspective, ESOPs are federal and state tax free. And the reason behind that is an S Corp, as most people know, is a pass-through entity from a tax perspective. So you pass all the taxes to the owner. And when you become an ESOP is a trust that is ultimately an ERISA plan. ERISA plans are ultimately not able to be taxed. So basically you pass the income that needs to be taxed to the ERISA plan, but then it says, oh, we don't have to pay taxes. And so they're federal and state tax free, opening up a lot of free cash flow for the company and making it kind of a feasible option given ESOPs are typically highly leveraged transactions.
And just to add to what he's saying, so 2 things I'll add. One, when you talk about the feasibility study, yes, we're showing the owner the valuation, the tax outcomes, et cetera. But my personal favorite slides, we're also doing an analysis of if you were to, execute on your forecast, this would be the outcomes for your employees, which that's something no one else gets to do, right? If you're selling to private equity or a strategic buyer, there is no analysis of the benefit to your employees. And that's always my favorite slide because it's life-changing. It's significant for these people.
So give me an example how it changes for an employee once they actually vest on that
Correct.
ESOP.
So there's a vesting, there's the earning of the shares. There's 2 things I tell my owners that they got to kind of get conceptually is you're not giving your company to these people. They are buying it with their sweat equity. The more they work, the harder they work, the more profitable the business becomes, the faster they buy you out, the faster they become owners. And ultimately the success of that business is what's going to drive their own retirement plans. I mean, if you buy Google stock, you're rooting for Google, but you're not impacting Google. If you buy the stock of your business. So conceptually, an ESOP, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is a 401k plan. It just has the stock of your company, but you actually have an impact on it. Now, the most sort of what I would say is unbiased, study of ESOPs is Rutgers University. They have a center of business ownership. And they do study after study after study of employee-owned companies, twice as likely to survive COVID. Attrition immediately goes down. Retention immediately goes up. Productivity immediately goes up. We could do studies on this, but you and I know why. Because it's human nature. Now that I'm an employee owner, and I'll make you the same offer that I make everybody, people always ask me, it's my favorite question, how do I know if a company's employee-owned? And I always say, well, just go look at their logo, look at their press releases, look at their website, look at their trucks, look at their shirts. It's everywhere. If you can find me one company that has their logo and under it private equity owned, I'll buy you dinner for 2 at Nick and Sam's on me. It's just human nature that they have this sense of pride in being an owner of the business. So this tax structure is what...
Well, it becomes part of their identity, right? They identify with that. And so you're creating a level of loyalty you otherwise wouldn't have from an employee.
And continuity, because the clients aren't going to... There's no change. When we form an ESOP, they're going to create a board of directors. The board of, they pick the board. The board's going to pick the management team. Well, guess who they pick every time? The management team. It's a little more governance. But I always tell people when you launch, I have one this Friday, big company here in Dallas. They're going to launch and they're going to have a big, huge party. You know what happens Monday? Nothing. They just go back to work. Nothing changes because to be an ESOP, you have to prove you are such a good company that you can create this profit, use these tax incentives to create retirement plans for hundreds of people at a time while the owner is still getting bought out at fair market value plus interest. We'll get into that later.
Yeah. And I think that's an important facet, right? Because I think it gets a little confusing when you say employee ownership. Does that mean they own the company? Does that mean they can go park in the owner's parking spot? Do they get to see all the payroll data now?
Right.
Absolutely not. Nothing changes post-close, right? And so what it really is they're the beneficiary of the stock and the valuation of that stock over a period of time. And as we know, similar to a house, as you pay off debt, and value of a business goes up or value of a house goes up, so does your equity in that house. And a company works exactly the same way. And so where the power really comes in is, every year they're getting annual statements based on the number of shares they have in the business, because they get shares over a period of time, and then what the value of those shares is. So as they see that increasing based on their behaviors, ultimately it can be very powerful and a tool from like a psychology perspective of driving more effective, efficient employees.
So when do they have that big liquidity event? Let's just say, they vest and they're building equity into the company. When is that big liquidity event for them?
Yeah, so typically we structure a plan like a typical 401k plan. There's a vesting period, there's a payout period, and so there is a repurchase obligation associated with this. It isn't we allocate 100% of shares day one. Let's just say the company goes to the moon and everybody's millionaires and they're like, I'm done, we're retiring. We need to create a sustainable plan that's effective both to get the owner out of the business from a liquidity perspective, but also to make sure that ultimately the company continue to exist into the future. And so it's a lot more methodical. We're typically allocating shares over anywhere from 30 to 100 years. And as much as that sounds like a lot of years, and we're really focused on making sure benefits are reasonable and something that is meaningful to our employees. And so that's typically, let's just say 5 years out, we want to make sure their benefits at about 50% of their salary, 10 years, about 100%. And then from there, however high it can get. But what we don't want to see again is to put the company in a tough situation where that repurchase obligation, when they have to buy the employees out, becomes a burden to the company and ultimately causes issues.
Yeah, this is where, again, having the right people doing the right modeling to understand what is a healthy amount of repurchase obligation, et cetera. Now, to go back to your original question, when do they have their liquidity event as an employee? Well, typically that's going to be around retirement. And 65 years old, they retire. To your point, they are never physical shareholders. I want to take a little, because there might be some technical folks who listen to this. The way that works is all of the shares are in the trust, the ESOP trust. And the trust is assigning them shares every year and they're vesting into those shares. But the trust still maintains ownership and they are beneficiaries of the trust.
Yeah.
But they never physically shareholders. That's a big myth that I had to work on here in Texas.
Yeah.
Because a lot of owners were like, oh, they could sell my company. They could demand to see financials. We do love the story of the employee who parked in the CEO's parking space as a joke. My favorite T-shirt is one where they made T-shirts for everybody that said, if I act like I own the place, it's because I do. But to your point, it's about modeling what we all know in the industry to be a healthy, and this is where the third-party administrator comes in, and we're doing a healthy analysis of the employees, what's a healthy amount to be given out every year, because the repurchase obligation, CPAs name everything exactly what it is. It's an obligation to repurchase. Yeah. So the owners need to understand this is like an old 1980s, kind of like a defined benefit pension plan that you're putting away money and they're having an impact on the growth of the business, buying out the owner, but eventually they will retire and there's a healthy amount. And this is where you do studies every 3 years to make sure, there's this bell curve of your employees and their retirements. And then even when they retire, a healthy plan doesn't just pay them all out because you might have 3 long-term employees retire the same year. You pay it out over a 5-year period. That's right. So you smooth the payments to match the income. This is all kind of that actuarial exercise.
So what I'm hearing is they don't actually own the actual equity in the company. No. They're essentially beneficiaries to the trust, which the trust is the actual ERISA plan.
Correct.
Right? And so once they hit retirement, let's just say 65, they go off into the sunset. They no longer work there. Are they getting paid out over a period of time?
Yep. Okay. Typically a 5-year period.
Yeah.
And by the way, if they and an ESOP is not a guarantee of employment either. You can get fired, you can quit.
That's right.
But if you vested and earned your shares, they are yours.
Yeah.
And then typically, a healthy plan will put some guardrails around a waiting period if it's that situation, because that's what we call an unnatural exit. Because you don't want to incent employees to quit, get a bunch of cash, and then come back the next day. We call that the skidoo problem. I'm aging myself because people don't call them skidoos anymore. If you're over 40, you know what I'm talking about, water ski. But you don't want, and like in a blue collar business where an employee gets to year 3 and they have $30,000 in their plan and they go, well, if I quit, I can go buy a boat. Well, you can quit, but there's a waiting period and then a payout, and then you're going to have to start your vesting all over. We don't want to encourage bad behavior, but these are exceptions. It's just things you learn over time, how to build healthy plans. But you look at Austin Industries, the oldest ESOP, I believe, in Texas, TD Industries, Highland Homes, one employee owned everywhere that you see them. And, Austin, I think, has been one for decades now.
Well, let's talk about the actual owners. So you said that this plan is an option to the existing owners to transition their company, right? How does the owner get paid out, and what is that FMV process, or that fair market value process of appraising the company? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can. So when we do the feasibility study, again, we're looking at every machination of it, and we're going to come up with, from our valuation experts and our CPAs and attorneys, they're all experts at this. Brad comes from that background. We're going to look and tell the owner, okay, we feel very confident that your financials dictate this valuation. It's always pretty much going to be discounted cash flow, a little bit of market comps in there, rarely asset, for any valuation folks out there. So we're going to show the owner. I always say it's like poker. We are only sell-side advisors. We think it's a conflict of interest to represent an owner and then a trustee on another engagement, because it's kind of like you find out your realtor is both selling your house and represents the buyer of your house. You're like, so we only represent owners. So we show them what I would say in poker is their cards.
Yeah.
Then they go out, interview trustees, hire a trustee. That trustee hires a valuation firm, law firm, and now they've got their side of the table, and they're going to show that trustee their cards. The difference is the trustee does not have a financial motivation. They're not looking to buy low, sell high. Their obligation is to pay full fair value per the law for the company. But we're going to negotiate back and forth, just like playing poker. They're going to show them their cards. We'll show our owners our cards. But again, it's not an adversarial negotiation. Everybody wants to create an employee-owned company. What we don't want is something, and the trustee's role is to make sure you're not doing something illegal, unethical, or fraudulent. We vet our owners to make sure. You can tell pretty early those 5% out there that are doing it for the wrong reasons. The owners that come to us are doing it for the right reasons, so we don't really have to worry about that per se. Unless they just are really good actors. But the trustee wants to come to fair value. The owner wants to come to fair value because there's all these other goals that are not just about money for these folks. But at the same time, full fair value is typically higher than a financial buyer will pay. At the end of the day, financial buyers are house flippers. You don't make money buying fair value. You make money buy low, sell high.
Right.
So we tend to be, even from that perspective, minus the tax advantages, a higher buyer. Now, a strategic is a different question. Strategics can pay above fair market value. The reason for that is they have synergies. Synergies is code for we can fire a lot of your people. Let's just be frank. That's what synergies are. That's why there's so many unemployed CFOs now called interim CFOs, because they can come in and they don't need your CFO, your head of marketing, your head of IT, et cetera. We are capitalists. I never judge. Our owners have sold companies and bought and sold, but as long as you as an owner understand that, and I think that's where some of our owners are like, hey, I just worked with an owner and you wouldn't know this, but his CFO is his brother-in-law. That makes for a really awkward Thanksgiving if you don't know that and he sells to a third party and so it's not just the financial goals. There's a ton of personal goals that get involved with our owners because that's on the table. Whereas in a financial transaction, that's really just kind of up to you as a seller, right? Like you just have to figure that out on your own. The financial buyer doesn't care about your personal outcome, your legacy, your community, et cetera. So,
yeah, I think you covered that all very well, Doug. I think maybe getting to the second piece of your question, how does the owner get out of the transaction, right? Yeah. So, day one, you close the ESOP. Typically, for most ESOPs, we're going to raise some form of capital. So we're going to go to senior lenders, or if an owner really wanted to get private credit in there, or some other form of debt that would enable them to get kind of further in what we would call the capital stack or more cash at close. We're going to raise that capital, and that's going to be the first payment to the owners. The rest is really a seller note that the owner takes back. And so really it's probably the one big negative that we have to make sure owners are comfortable with, because if you're going to take 80% of your purchase price and seller note, you need to believe in your business for the next 5 years in order to get out. And you want to make sure that you probably want to be around in order to kind of control that destiny. So it's a really important facet to this. And typically we'll structure the seller note kind of in two ways, and we'll have some form of cash interest and some form of warrants. And really some of that is driven by, you want to give owners the ability to get some upside in their business if it outperforms over a period of time. But then also you don't want to put too much debt service on the business, because a lot of these owners in general, they're pretty debt adverse. A lot of times we get owners coming to the table and they typically don't have a ton of debt.
So what happens when you get over leveraged with debt?
I mean, ultimately, you'd go into default and there'd be structures to that. But I would tell you, one of the benefits to the ESOP is the tax-free nature. And so, historically that owner may have been paying, if you're an S Corp, you're paying 30-40% in taxes. Well, if you're an S Corp ESOP, you're paying 0 in taxes. And so you have a lot more cash flow to go help manage that debt in the early stages. Because I would say those first 3 years, as you're trying to kind of unlever, are probably the most vital years in that ESOP. Look, I don't think if you miss your projections and you stay the same kind of size from an EBITDA perspective each year, you're not going to have an issue paying for the debt service. It's really if you were to crater in performance, which would be an issue, and we'd have
an
to
ESOP is not a guarantee of success for a company either. But give you kind of numbers. If you have a company making 20 million in EBITDA, it's pretty easy in the market today for us. We know the banks that love these, and they're not like the bank of ESOPs of Omaha. They're banks that across Texas, across the nation. Sorry, I'm a little Texas centric. 20 million in EBITDA. We go to the bank. We say, okay, lend us 40. They could pay it off every 2 years, and they're going to be tax free, and they've got 20 years of success to prove this out. And they put it on a 7-year AM. Let's say something bad were to happen. The other part of that let's say 60, 80 million, whatever, is seller note. Well, if Bob is the owner, Bob is never going to call the seller note on himself. Right. It's what we call the friendliest money there is. He can go to the trustee and say, hey, you know what? Don't worry about the interest. Don't worry about making payments. Focus on the bank debt, which again is fairly nominal if you consider they could pay it off every 2 years and be tax-free on top of that. So the banks who figured this out really understand this and see these as very safe loans from that perspective. So the liquidity, but now, does it protect you from everything? No. Macroeconomic, your industry goes, and to your point, if you're in oil and gas and you think solar is going to take off and put you out of business in 3 years, you should sell to a third party today. This is not for you.
So let's talk about because we've talked about owners and you just mentioned industry. Let's transition really quick because we only have so much time. We're really here to talk about ESOPs specifically in one particular industry, and that's in the industry of cannabis. Brad, you're one of the few ESOP guys that I know that's playing in this space. Tell me about that transition, how you decided to take your skills involving ESOPs and finding opportunities in the cannabis industry, and particularly how you help business owners when you have these discussions about setting up ESOPs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was pretty interesting. So our founder, Bruce Lazear, he came to me about, 6-8 months ago, and we had an opportunity to come into the door related to the cannabis space. And given my background, I know the capital markets pretty well. He's like, one of the big things they've talked about is they can't get capital. And so I went on this whole exploration where I basically started using my entire network to figure out who are the banks that play in the space, what are their appetite for lending. And then I kind of rolled that into, let me start talking to lawyers in the space. Let me understand every aspect of kind of a cannabis ESOP, because, I would tell you an ESOP is an ESOP in a sense that they're not so different between maybe cannabis or construction, but there are nuances to every industry that are really important to consider. And I think
because construction companies don't have the same challenges with cash flow and tax issues and lending.
Exactly. So what's interesting is what I came to find out as I started diving in is ESOPs are perfect options for owners who are trying to get a liquidity event in the cannabis space. I mean, if you kind of go back, there isn't really a capital market space for cannabis companies. It's really hard to sell to third parties. And then when they do sell it, it's for not great, well-structured deals and for well below fair market deals, in my opinion. And then I think, there was a period of time where a lot of companies used the public markets to try to get liquidity, which going and adding a ton of regulation to yourself and adding compliance costs is not always a great
there was that
option.
period where people were setting up SPACs to raise money, and you go on, launch an IPO through using that SPAC. And so some of that's changed, but
Yeah, absolutely.
Is SPAC still a thing? No, sorry. No offense to any SPAC fans out there.
That really was one of the ways to raise money, to raise capital.
Oh, no,
So in the cannabis space,
absolutely. And they'd go through the Canadian exchange,
That's right.
then co-list on the US. And even then, you still only got so many investors that wanted it, and you're kind of subject, again, to a lot higher compliance cost and the volatility of the capital markets. And so what I kind of realized is why aren't more cannabis companies doing this? And why do I say that? Well, let's start step one, 280E. I think most people in cannabis space are very familiar with 280E and the idea that you can't deduct business expenses from your tax return. I know there's a lot of companies out there that are taking positions where they think that they don't need to follow 280E and creating a huge tax liability. Well, doing an ESOP solves the entire thing. I mean, the reality is you can apply 280E, but as we've talked about, it's federal and state tax free. And so it doesn't matter. We're not going to be dealing with the cash flow going to the government. It's going to stay within the company. And so right there, that's a huge benefit for companies and kind of throws away that tax liability. And companies that are applying 280E, they're paying 40 to 70% effective tax rates, which is just not sustainable for businesses and business owners. And you can have a great running business, but if you're paying that much in taxes, that's an impossible solution for companies to continue to grow and be profitable and ultimately get money out. I think the other kind of piece of it is, given the fair value aspect, we kind of talked about it a little bit. They can't pay, or a lot of third parties aren't paying fair value for these companies. I mean, I think I saw a deal in the third party market that was structured. They get 2 times cash at close, 2 times earn out, and then 2 times they take back in the other company's stock. And that's based on an EBITDA multiple. And it's like, that's not really an effective way to get out of your company. And so, from an ESOP perspective, we're required to pay fair value for the business, or the trustee is. And so what it provides is a liquidity event for these business owners that have created these great cannabis companies to get out at a value that makes sense. And that actually can ultimately get a return for their investors, because I think a lot of, if you kind of look at the spectrum of what we've run into of these companies, a lot of them have third party investors. And so they're trying to figure out, how do we get out of this deal? That we saw an opportunity because Ohio legalized cannabis and it started as just medicinal and now it's adult use and it's amazing. But am I going to get a return on my capital? How do I get out? And if my option is I get 2 times on my company cash at close, basically, that's not a great return for me in the end. And so when we kind of look at ESOPs, like, we think depending on the company, we can get 6 to 7x on their EBITDA, which is a great exit for a lot of these guys. So, on the fair value aspect and getting that return, it's a great option. And so now,
are you getting through 6 to 8x because there's that fair market value requirement?
Yeah. So that's the thing. They're going to go through evaluation and they're going to look at the DCF. They don't really look at the market comps or the public comps for this, just given the nature of the industry. And it's really a DCF. So if you have a lot of growth in your forecast, you can DCF into a 6 to 7 easy, potentially 8, depending on how much growth you have. And we've seen really great companies doing, growing at 10% clips a year. And it's like a 7x is very achievable for you. And they're like, really? That's amazing. And so I think we've come into this interesting paradigm where we're seeing it to be becoming a very prevalent way to get out of these companies for these investors and these owners, because they're starting to seek liquidity events. They've been kind of pigeonholed by the federal government, by all the regulation, everything going on for a while now. And the reality of it is things have loosened a little bit in the regulatory environment. and companies are becoming more profitable. Ultimately, consolidation has happened, and so there's a time. It's time. How do I get out? And so we're seeing a lot of companies starting to look at this as a really viable option, and it's starting to become really prevalent.
Now, you said that your owner came to you about 6 to 8 months ago, so you're fairly new in the cannabis industry. In this 6 to 8 months time, what do you see as the biggest pushback or some of the challenges within the cannabis industry that you don't see in others, if any?
Honestly, I don't see any. It's kind of interesting, and I won't mention our competitor, but there was kind of somebody that put a bad name on ESOPs in the industry.
Okay.
And so the biggest pushback when I've started to network is really the education of what an ESOP is. And I think it comes back to what Doug and I do best. We need to educate people, what is an ESOP?
Hence our first question, what is an ESOP?
That's a failure on my part that you don't know.
and so getting the right information out there to these owners, to these investors, to really show them, look, this is a great option and something that you should really consider if you need a liquidity event. Mm-hmm. Look, maybe now is not the time, maybe it's 3 years from now, but you can always have a conversation. You can always assess it. I mean, we do our feasibility analysis is typically free. And so, we'll go through the process, and if you're not ready today, maybe you're ready in 3 years. And so,
how long is a feasibility study usually? How long does it last?
4 to 5 weeks is what are from when we get engaged, and some of that's dependent on they need to be able to provide us a 5-year projection.
Yeah,
and so that's sometimes a new ask for companies.
Let me add a real quick caveat on that, because I always get worried when we say we do a free feasibility analysis.
Yeah,
we don't charge for them, but we also do not do them lightly.
Yeah.
Because they cost us internally 40 to 50.
I was just going to say, isn't that kind of a big risk? Because if you're putting in 4 to 5 weeks of a feasibility study, you're doing a SWOT analysis and everything else, you're gathering data, that requires time, manpower, resources. How do you justify getting not just a return, but let's just say you do like 5 feasibility studies, you may get engaged by one. What,
no. So
two?
that's how you lose your job doing what I do. So it is imperative on Brad and I to, as much as owners are vetting us as an advisor,
you're vetting them.
We're
too.
vetting them.
Yeah.
We will. Okay. And I had one owner who said, "I want my free valuation." I said, "Pump the brakes." Right off the bat, that tells me you've got the wrong understanding. We are going to get to know you. We're going to talk to you. We're going to do what we call an ESOP 101. We're going to spend an hour and a half explaining how an ESOP works. I've had owners who say, "I'm ready to go to the feasibility." I said, "No, go home, talk to your wife, take some time." Because again,
I think what happens is they just hear the word free.
They hear that. That's why I wanted to jump in there when he said free.
No, it's good.
We don't charge, but we don't do that. But by the time, so to answer your question, when you said 1 out of 5, it's more like 4 out of 5 move forward, because we've vetted them to the point, and usually even the 5th one, it might just be something outlying, like a timing. Okay, I'm going to wait a year or whatever it might be. But our rate, again, the way you lose your job doing what I do is doing a bunch of feasibility studies that don't move forward. So we're real cautious about how we do them. The other thing that's interesting, talking just about our firm in general, one thing that makes us unique, I would say, compared to everyone else is, yes, Columbus is the mothership. That's where all the super smart guys, we keep them in their cubes, throw them meat every so often. They're all great. But we have a presence not only in every market, because we learned knowing advisors like yourself matter, knowing the banks matter, knowing the local CPA firms matters. There's that continuity for an owner to know that the people they know. 2, I would love to say, you're just going to bring me ESOPs, I can sit around and wait. And I feel like that's what a lot of other advisors do. We actually proactively go out into the industries, the associations. We meet with the owners, the advisors who are specific to that association. Yeah. So Steve in California, he focuses on ag distribution. Me, I focus on construction. We got another guy focused on auto dealership. But at any time, if I run into an auto dealership, I'm just going to pull him in. If I run into a cannabis company, hence how I introduced him to you.
Right.
But we take a much breadthier geographic and industry focus, because what we find is the advisors are not bringing up ESOPs, but it's really easy. The owners actually all kind of go, I want to understand that, but no one seems to be able to explain it to me. Will you just explain it to me? And then that's sort of our differentiator.
Got it. Well, I think we can go on and on about this because there's a lot of other questions I want to ask, but I think I've covered a lot of the big ones. The next, to kind of wrap things up because we're running out of time here. My understanding is that you're headed to MJ Biz. Have you ever been to MJ Biz?
First time.
First time. There's always that rookie that's walking around MJ Biz that's never been there. It's a big event. I've been there in excess of probably like 10 times. You'll have a great time. But tell me about some of the other ways other than going to places like MJ Biz on how you're promoting Lazear and how you're kind of getting out into the industry within cannabis.
Yeah, so conferences are obviously a big thing. It's not just MJ Biz. I was actually a month ago at the Ignite It regional conference in Cincinnati. And so we're trying to put a presence kind of across the conference circles, but really some of it is going to be also just trying to get on stage and educating people. And so actually our owner has asked me to put together a business plan on infusing capital to try to actually start educating people across the industry. So that's really one way. I think the other way is people like yourself, Richard. I mean, it's really networking across the industry. Doug's talked about it. I mean, we have people, 15 cities across the country. They have huge networks. Everybody knows somebody that works in some capacity in the cannabis industry or may know somebody who kind of has some connection in there. So a lot of it is connecting through that, doing your typical networking, getting on calls, talking to the COIs, as we would call them, to some of the owners of the industry. And so I think it's really, we like to say we lead through education. And I think that's a really key differentiator for Lazear is education really drives and ultimately creates a lot of opportunity. And so the more people we can sit down with, have these types of discussions like we are on your podcast, the better we can make sure people really understand what an ESOP is, and the more people know who Lazear is and can get comfortable with us as a firm.
Yeah, and I know I keep coming back to poker analogies. Obviously, and I'm not a poker player, just my family on Thanksgiving. Just got a dominance thing during the family get-togethers. But one of the things that's really, and I know people say this, but within our firm, we have a culture that is just amazing. There's no sharp elbows. Everybody's believes in a rising tide lifts all ships. So we're fortunate to have the infrastructure where not only, Brad's obviously leading the charge on this, but we can connect our Phoenix guy with the banking contact in Phoenix. We can connect our Charlotte guy with, the Charlotte CPA partner. We're going to go have lunch after this with another, we have the ability to not only just spearhead it from an association and education and a presentation, but we also have a national infrastructure. We can kind of come at it and educate people around the country because they're not all just in Denver. They're not all in Dallas. They're not, they're everywhere. And so we can approach, and again, it doesn't mean any of us are going to take that, Brad's going to take the lead charge on that, but we can approach it from getting everyone around the country understanding the different outcomes that we could produce.
Awesome. Well, just to wrap things up, just in a short, brief statement, what is your goal for 2026? And what is your goal in 2026 as we finish out the year?
Honestly, for my goal, especially, really focus on at least the cannabis aspect. My goal is to really kind of drive real education for the key players across the industry. Again, I kind of had mentioned earlier, it was from people I have talked to, they just kind of feel like ESOPs are misunderstood. And so what I really want to do is make sure I can kind of be a face and generate relationships, educate, make sure people understand. Obviously, I'd like to close a few ESOP deals along the way, and that is always our goal. But
you should have started with that. Close ESOP deals done. 2026.
We're not a nonprofit.
That should have been your first statement.
Close as many ESOPs in the cannabis space as possible is the reality. What
about you, Doug?
So it's interesting. 5 years ago, I always say it was like opening a McDonald's franchise in China, right? Like everybody was like talking to me about burgers suck and drive-through suck. And there's been a palatable change in the last 2 years, which has been terrific. We had banks are coming to me now saying we want in. More competition is moving in, but I hate to say just from Texas, and I love construction. I just want to continue to see that education and growth amongst owners. It's been palatable where I had to explain ESOPs 5 years ago, and now I'm getting introduced to owners almost on a daily basis because 65% of our clients come from our prior clients. So when we close an ESOP, the owner has a tremendously happy outcome. You know, if you look at Exit Planning Institute, they said 75% of owners report profoundly regretting selling their company within 1 year. Within our community with ESOPs, if they're the right owner and it's the right outcome, we typically get introduced to 4 more owners. So I've just enjoyed seeing this mind shift change with not only the owners, but also advisors suddenly going, this is really something that more and more people should look at. I just want to continue that momentum because it's been really fun to watch.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on the show and educating me and the audience about ESOPs. And I'm sure there's, this wave of ESOPs it will continue to grow, and hopefully you can make a difference in the cannabis industry. Right.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us, Richard, and really appreciate it. Yeah, this was awesome.
No, thank you.